Sarah Martinez wiped her hands on her worn apron as she watched her 8-year-old daughter Emma play in the small playground behind their apartment building. The concrete was cracked, weeds pushing through the gaps, but Emma didn't seem to notice. She was lost in her own world, talking to her stuffed elephant Mr. Peanuts as she pushed him down the rusty slide. "Mama, look, Mr. Peanuts is flying," Emma called out, her voice full of joy despite their circumstances. Sarah forced a smile, though her heart ached. 3 months ago, her world had collapsed when her husband David died in a construction accident. The insurance money barely covered the funeral costs, and now she was struggling to keep their heads above water. Her job at the local diner paid minimum wage, and the tips were getting smaller each week as more businesses closed down in their neighborhood. The envelope in her pocket felt heavy with the weight of its contents. Another eviction notice. They had 2 weeks to come up with 3 months' rent or they would be out on the street. Sarah had already sold everything valuable they owned, including her wedding ring and David's tools. There was nothing left except the clothes on their backs and Emma's few precious toys. "Mrs. Martinez." Sarah turned to see Mrs., their elderly neighbor, approaching with a concerned expression. Mrs. had been kind to them since David's death, often bringing over extra soup or watching Emma when Sarah had to work late shifts. "I couldn't help but notice the man who came by earlier," Mrs. said gently. "He looked official." Sarah nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Mrs. was one of the few people who knew about their financial troubles. "It was the landlord's representative. We have 2 weeks." Mrs.'s face fell. "Oh dear, have you thought about the shelter downtown? I know it's not ideal, but—" "I can't take Emma there," Sarah interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've seen the news reports. It's not safe for children. There have been incidents." The older woman nodded sadly. The city's homeless shelter had been in the headlines recently for all the wrong reasons. Poor management, overcrowding, and several cases of children going missing had made it a place of last resort. "There might be other options," Mrs. suggested. "Have you tried calling social services?" Sarah's blood ran cold. "No, I won't let them take Emma away from me. That's not an option." She had heard too many horror stories about children being placed in foster care and disappearing into a broken system. Emma was all she had left of her family, the only good thing in her life. Whatever happened, she would keep her daughter safe. That evening, after Emma had fallen asleep clutching Mr. Peanuts, Sarah sat at their small kitchen table with a calculator and a pile of bills. No matter how many times she ran the numbers, they didn't add up. Even if she picked up extra shifts at the diner, even if she found a second job, there was no way to come up with enough money in 2 weeks. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her boss at the diner. "Sorry, Sarah, have to cut your hours starting next week. Business is slow." Sarah put her head in her hands and cried silently, careful not to wake Emma. She had never felt so helpless, so completely out of options. The next morning, Sarah was walking Emma to school when they passed the construction site where David used to work. The building was nearly complete now, a gleaming office tower that would house some tech company. Sarah always tried to avoid this route, but today the city bus wasn't running due to maintenance issues. "Daddy helped build that, didn't he, Mama?" Emma asked, pointing up at the tall building. "Yes, sweetheart, Daddy worked very hard on it." "I bet he's proud watching from heaven," Emma said matter-of-factly. At 8 years old, she had accepted her father's death with the resilience that only children possessed, but Sarah knew the loss affected her deeply. They were about to cross the street when a black limousine pulled up to the construction site. Sarah paid little attention until she heard a woman's voice, sharp and demanding. "This is completely unacceptable. I specifically said the marble in the lobby needed to be Carrara, not this cheap imitation. Do you have any idea what my husband paid for this building?" Sarah glanced over and saw a woman in her 40s stepping out of the limousine. She was dressed in designer clothes from head to toe, her hair perfectly styled, diamonds glittering at her ears and throat. Everything about her screamed wealth and privilege. The woman was berating a man in a hard hat who appeared to be the site's supervisor. "Mrs. Blackwood, I understand your concerns, but the marble we used meets all the specifications in the contract." "Don't quote contracts to me," the woman snapped. "My husband owns half this city. One phone call from me and you'll never work in construction again." Sarah hurried Emma along, not wanting her daughter to witness the ugly scene. But as they walked, she couldn't stop thinking about the woman's attitude. Mrs. Blackwood, that name was familiar. Sarah had seen it in the local newspaper's society pages. Victoria Blackwood, wife of real estate mogul James Blackwood. They were one of the wealthiest couples in the state. At school, Sarah kissed Emma goodbye and watched her daughter skip into the building, her backpack bouncing with each step. Emma was such a bright, happy child despite everything they had been through. She deserved so much better than the uncertainty and fear that had become their daily reality. Walking back home, Sarah passed and saw Victoria Blackwood's picture on the front page of the lifestyle section. The headline read, "Billionaire's wife hosts charity gala for children in need." The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. Here was a woman who had more money than she could spend in 10 lifetimes, hosting parties to help children, while Sarah couldn't even keep a roof over her own daughter's head. That afternoon, Sarah was working her shift at the diner when she overheard two customers talking at the counter. "Did you see that story about the Blackwood woman?" one of them said. "Apparently, she spent $50,000 on a dress for some charity thing." "50,000?" the other replied. "That's more than most people make in a year." Sarah's hands trembled as she poured their coffee. $50,000. That amount could solve all her problems, pay their rent for 2 years, and give Emma the stability she deserved. But it was just the cost of a dress to someone like Victoria Blackwood. When her shift ended, Sarah walked home through the downtown area, lost in thought. She found herself standing outside the Blackwood building, a 60-story tower that served as headquarters for James Blackwood's empire. The lobby was indeed magnificent, with marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Security guards in expensive suits stood at attention near the elevators. Sarah pressed her face against the glass, looking up at the floors that stretched toward the sky. Somewhere up there, decisions were made that affected thousands of people's lives. Somewhere up there sat people who had never worried about where their next meal was coming from or whether they would have a place to sleep. "Can I help you, miss?" Sarah jumped and turned to see a security guard approaching. She realized she must look suspicious, a woman in a waitress uniform staring into the building. "No, I'm sorry, I was just admiring the architecture," she said quickly. The guard's expression softened slightly. "It is beautiful. Mr. Blackwood spared no expense when he had it built. You have a good day now." As Sarah walked away, an idea began to form in her mind. It was desperate and probably foolish, but she was running out of time and options. She had read that Victoria Blackwood was involved in various charities. Maybe, just maybe, if Sarah could somehow meet her and explain their situation, the woman might help. After all, what was a few $1,000s to someone who spent $50,000 on a dress? That night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah researched everything she could find about Victoria Blackwood online. The woman attended countless social events, charity galas, and fundraisers. Her calendar seemed to be a continuous parade of high society gatherings. But how could someone like Sarah ever gain access to that world? The answer came from an unexpected source. While searching through charity event listings, Sarah discovered that Victoria Blackwood was scheduled to appear at a book signing at an upscale bookstore downtown. The event was open to the public, and according to the website, Mrs. Blackwood would be promoting a coffee table book about luxury interior design. Sarah's heart raced. This might be her only chance to approach Victoria Blackwood directly. She would have to take time off work, which she couldn't afford, but this could be the solution to all their problems. The next morning, Sarah called in sick to the diner and asked Mrs. to pick up Emma from school. She spent her last $20 on a simple black dress from a thrift store, hoping to look presentable enough to blend in at the bookstore event. The bookstore was in the wealthy part of the city, a place Sarah rarely visited. As she approached the building, she could see through the large windows that the store was packed with well-dressed people holding wine glasses and copies of Victoria Blackwood's book. Sarah's confidence wavered as she looked down at her thrift store dress and scuffed shoes. She didn't belong here. These people were from a different world entirely. But then she thought about Emma, about the eviction notice, about the very real possibility of ending up on the street, and she forced herself to walk through the door. The bookstore smelled of expensive perfume and leather-bound books. Conversations buzzed around her in cultured tones, discussing art, travel, and social events. Sarah felt invisible as she made her way through the crowd, searching for Victoria Blackwood. She found her near the back of the store, seated at a table stacked high with copies of her book. Victoria looked even more impressive in person, wearing what was clearly a designer suit and jewelry that probably cost more than Sarah's annual income. A line of admirers waited to have their books signed and to exchange pleasantries with the billionaire's wife. Sarah joined the line, her palms sweating as she rehearsed what she would say. This was it, her one chance to change everything for herself and Emma. She just had to find the right words, the right approach. When she finally reached the front of the line, Victoria looked up with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hello, dear. Would you like me to personalize your copy?" Sarah realized she hadn't bought a book. Heat rushed to her cheeks. "Actually, Mrs. Blackwood, I was hoping I could speak with you about something important. My name is Sarah Martinez, and I'm in a very difficult situation." Victoria's smile vanished instantly. "Excuse me." "My daughter and I are about to be evicted," Sarah continued quickly, sensing her opportunity slipping away. "My husband died in an accident, and I'm trying to keep us together. I know you do charity work, and I was hopping." "Security," Victoria's voice cut through Sarah's words like a knife. Two men in suits appeared almost instantly. Sarah felt hands on her arms, gently but firmly guiding her away from the table. "Wait, please," Sarah called out desperately. "I just need help, my daughter." But Victoria had already turned away, focusing on the next person in line, as if Sarah had never existed. The security guards escorted her to the door and deposited her on the sidewalk outside. Sarah stood there for a moment, humiliated and defeated. Through the window, she could see Victoria laughing with a customer, completely unaffected by their encounter. To her, Sarah was just another person trying to take advantage of her wealth, easily dismissed and forgotten. Walking back to her neighborhood, Sarah felt the weight of her failure crushing down on her. She had pinned her hopes on the kindness of a stranger, and that stranger had shown her exactly where she stood in the world's hierarchy. She was nobody, invisible, unworthy of even a moment's consideration. When she picked up Emma from Mrs.'s apartment, her daughter immediately noticed her mood. "Mama, are you sad?" Emma asked, wrapping her small arms around Sarah's waist. "A little, sweetheart, but we'll be okay." "Of course we will," Emma said with the confidence of a child who trusted her mother completely. "You always take care of everything." That night, as Sarah tucked Emma into bed, her daughter looked up at her with serious eyes. "Mama, I heard you crying last night. Are we in trouble?" Sarah's heart broke a little more. She had tried so hard to shield Emma from their problems, but children were more perceptive than adults gave them credit for. "We might have to move soon," Sarah said carefully. "But wherever we go, we'll be together. That's what matters." Emma nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Maybe we'll move somewhere with a bigger playground, and maybe Mr. Peanuts will like it better, too." After Emma fell asleep, Sarah sat alone in their small living room, staring at the eviction notice that would seal their fate in just over a week. Victoria Blackwood's dismissal had been a harsh reminder of reality. People like her didn't care about people like Sarah. The wealthy lived in their own world, insulated from the struggles of ordinary people. But as Sarah looked around their modest apartment, at the pictures of David on the walls and Emma's artwork stuck to the refrigerator, she realized something important. This might not be much, but it was home. It was where David had carried her over the threshold when they were newlyweds. It was where Emma had taken her first steps. It was where they had been a family. She couldn't give up, not yet. There had to be another way, another solution she hadn't considered. For Emma's sake, she would keep fighting until the very last moment. The billionaire's wife might have dismissed her, but Sarah Martinez wasn't going to disappear quietly into the night. Sarah woke up the next morning with renewed determination. She had spent the night making a list of every possible option, every person she could ask for help, every resource she hadn't yet explored. The rejection from Victoria Blackwood still stung, but it had also lit a fire in her belly. If the wealthy wouldn't help, she would find another way. Her first stop was the bank where she and David had taken out their mortgage years ago. Mr., the loan officer who had helped them buy their small house before David's accident, greeted her with sympathy but little hope. "I wish there was something I could do, Sarah," he said, looking through her file. "But with your current income and credit situation, we can't approve any kind of loan or refinancing. I'm truly sorry." Sarah had expected this answer, but it still hurt to hear. She thanked Mr. and left, crossing another option off her mental list. At the diner, her boss Tony pulled her aside during the lunch rush. "Sarah, I feel terrible about cutting your hours," he said, wiping his hands on his apron. "If there was any way I could help financially, you know I would, but the diner is barely breaking even as it is." Tony had been good to her, even letting her take home leftover food sometimes to help stretch her grocery budget. She couldn't ask him for more than he had already given. That afternoon, while Emma was at school, Sarah visited 3 different churches in their neighborhood. The pastors and volunteers were kind and sympathetic, but their emergency funds were already stretched thin helping other families in crisis. They offered food from their food banks and promised to pray for her, but prayers wouldn't pay the rent. The local community center had a small emergency assistance program, but Sarah learned she would need to wait 6 weeks for an appointment, and even then, they could only help with utility bills, not rent. Each rejection felt like another door slamming shut, but Sarah kept going. She visited the office of a local city councilman, hoping that someone in government might know of programs that could help. The receptionist was polite, but explained that the councilman was in budget meetings all week and couldn't see anyone without an appointment. "The earliest opening we have is 3 weeks from today," the young woman said apologetically. 3 weeks would be too late. By then, Sarah and Emma would already be homeless. Walking home from the government building, Sarah passed a construction site where crews were working on a new shopping complex. She paused, remembering how proud David had been of his work, how he would come home tired but satisfied, knowing he was building something that would last. "You okay, lady?" one of the workers called out, noticing her standing there. Sarah nodded quickly and continued walking. These men reminded her of David, honest, people who built the world around them but would never be wealthy enough to live in the buildings they created. That evening, Sarah helped Emma with her homework at their kitchen table while dinner simmered on the stove. Emma was working on a writing assignment about heroes. "Who's your hero, Mama?" Emma asked, looking up from her paper. "You are," Sarah said without hesitation. "You're brave and kind and smart. You're my greatest accomplishment." Emma beamed. "I wrote about you, want to hear?" Sarah nodded and Emma began to read. "My hero is my mama. She works very hard to take care of me. When I'm scared, she hugs me and tells me everything will be okay. When I'm hungry, she always makes sure I have food, even if she doesn't eat much. My mama is the strongest person in the world because she never gives up." Tears pricked Sarah's eyes. If only she felt as strong as Emma believed she was. The next day brought another blow. When Sarah arrived at the diner for her shift, Tony was waiting with a grim expression. "Sarah, I need to talk to you," he said, leading her to the small office behind the kitchen. "I just got word that the building owner is raising my rent by 40%. I can't afford to keep all my current staff." Sarah's heart sank. She knew what was coming before he said it. "I have to let you go," Tony continued, his voice heavy with regret. "You're a good worker, one of the best I've ever had, but with the reduced hours anyway, it makes more sense to consolidate with the other girls who have been here longer." Sarah nodded numbly. "I understand. When is my last day?" "Today, I'm afraid. I'll pay you for a full week, though, and there's a little bonus in there, too. I wish it could be more." Tony handed her an envelope with her final paycheck. Sarah thanked him and gathered her few personal items from her locker. Just like that, her last source of income was gone. Outside the diner, Sarah sat in her old Civic and opened the envelope. Along with her regular pay, Tony had included an extra $50 and a note that read, "For Emma, you're both in my prayers." Sarah closed her eyes and tried to think. The money Tony had given her, combined with what little she had in savings, might cover groceries for 2 weeks, but it wouldn't come close to covering rent or any other bills. She drove to Emma's school and sat in the parking lot, watching children play during recess. Emma was easy to spot, her dark hair in pigtails, laughing as she played tag with her friends. She looked so happy, so innocent. She had no idea that their world was about to crumble. Sarah's phone rang. It was Mrs. "Dear, I hope you don't mind me calling," the elderly woman said. "I've been thinking about your situation. My daughter lives in Portland, and she mentioned that there are better job opportunities there. Maybe a fresh start might be good for you and Emma." It was a kind suggestion, but Sarah didn't have the money to relocate, even if she could find a job in Portland. Moving would also mean leaving behind the last connections to David, the few friends Emma had made at school, and the small support network they had built. "Thank you, Mrs. I'll think about it," Sarah said, though she knew it wasn't realistic. That evening, Sarah made Emma's favorite dinner, spaghetti and meatballs, using ingredients from Tony's bonus money. She wanted to give her daughter one more normal evening before their world changed forever. After dinner, they sat together on the couch watching a Disney movie. Emma cuddled close to Sarah, her head resting on her mother's shoulder. "Mama, why do you look worried all the time now?" Emma asked during a commercial break. Sarah stroked her daughter's hair. "Sometimes adults have to think about difficult things, but you don't need to worry about that, sweetheart." "Is it because Daddy isn't here to help anymore?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. Emma rarely mentioned David directly, but Sarah could see that she was beginning to understand their situation more than she let on. "Partly yes," Sarah admitted, "but we're going to be okay, I promise." It was a promise she desperately hoped she could keep. The next morning, Sarah woke up to find Emma standing beside her bed, fully dressed for school. "I had a dream about Daddy," Emma announced. "He told me that sometimes the best help comes from places we don't expect." Sarah managed a smile. "That sounds like something Daddy would say." After dropping Emma at school, Sarah decided to try one more approach. She had heard about a legal aid society that helped low-income families facing eviction. Maybe a lawyer could find some loophole, some way to buy them more time. The legal aid office was in a rundown building downtown, filled with people who looked as desperate as Sarah felt. After waiting for 3 hours, she finally met with a young lawyer named Maria Santos. "I've reviewed your case," Maria said, looking through Sarah's paperwork. "Unfortunately, your landlord has followed all the proper procedures. The eviction is legal and there's no grounds to challenge it." "Isn't there anything," Sarah pleaded, "some program or law that could help?" Maria's expression was sympathetic but realistic. "The only thing I can suggest is trying to negotiate with your landlord for more time. Sometimes they'll accept a partial payment and extend the deadline if they believe you can eventually catch up." Sarah's landlord was a property management company that owned dozens of buildings across the city. She doubted they would be interested in negotiating with someone who couldn't even make partial payments. As she left the legal aid office, Sarah felt the last of her hope slipping away. She had exhausted every avenue, called in every favor, explored every resource. There was nowhere left to turn. Walking back to her car, she passed a newspaper stand and saw a familiar face on the front page. Victoria Blackwood was smiling at the camera, standing next to a check for $100,000 that she was donating to the Children's Hospital. The headline read, "Local philanthropist's generous donation will save children's lives." Sarah stared at the picture, remembering Victoria's cold dismissal at the bookstore. Here was a woman who could write a six-figure check without thinking twice, who was celebrated for her generosity to strangers, but who couldn't spare a moment of compassion for a desperate mother standing right in front of her. The irony was bitter. Victoria Blackwood would be praised for her charity while Sarah and Emma became statistics, another homeless family lost in the system. That afternoon, Sarah sat in the elementary school parking lot again, watching Emma play with her classmates. In a few days, she would have to pull Emma out of this school, away from her friends, away from the stability and routine that children needed. Her phone buzzed with a text message from the property management company. "Final notice. Rent payment due in 3 days or eviction proceedings will begin immediately." 3 days, 72 hours to find a miracle. When Emma climbed into the car after school, she was unusually quiet. "How was school today, sweetheart?" Sarah asked. "Mrs. asked me to stay after class," Emma said, looking worried. "She wanted to know if everything was okay at home. She said I've been distracted lately." Sarah's heart clenched. Emma's teacher was concerned because she could sense something was wrong, even though Emma was trying to be brave. "What did you tell her?" "I said we were fine," Emma replied. "But Mama, are we fine?" Sarah pulled over to the side of the road and turned to look at her daughter. Emma's big brown eyes, so much like David's, were filled with trust and concern that broke Sarah's heart. "We're going through a difficult time," Sarah said carefully. "But no matter what happens, we have each other, and that's the most important thing." Emma nodded seriously, like in the stories where the princess has to be brave even when scary things happen. "Exactly like that," Sarah said, fighting back tears. "You're my brave princess." That night, after Emma went to bed, Sarah sat at the kitchen table and made a list of their belongings. Everything they owned could fit into her old Civic if necessary. Their furniture was second-hand and not worth selling. David's tools were already gone. The only items of any real value were Emma's toys and books, and Sarah would never take those away from her daughter. She looked around their small apartment, at the home they had built together as a family. In 3 days, someone else would be living here, and Sarah and Emma would be sleeping in their car or in a shelter that wasn't safe for children. The thought of Emma's life being turned upside down, of her having to leave her school and friends, of not having a stable place to sleep or do homework, made Sarah feel physically sick. She had failed. Despite working multiple jobs, despite sacrificing everything, despite fighting with every ounce of strength she possessed, she had failed to protect her daughter from this disaster. But even as despair threatened to overwhelm her, a small voice in Sarah's mind reminded her of Emma's words that morning. Sometimes the best help comes from places we don't expect. Maybe David was trying to tell her something through their daughter's dream. Maybe there was still one more option she hadn't considered, one more door that hadn't been slammed in her face. Sarah looked at the clock. It was almost midnight, but she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Not while there was still time left on the clock. Tomorrow she would try one last desperate plan. It was risky and probably foolish, but it was the only idea she had left. For Emma's sake, she had to try everything, even if it meant swallowing her pride and facing another humiliating rejection. Sarah spent most of the night researching everything she could find about James Blackwood's business empire. If his wife wouldn't listen, maybe she could find a way to reach him directly. She discovered that Blackwood Industries was involved in numerous construction projects around the city, including low-income housing developments that received government funding. By dawn, Sarah had formulated a plan. It was a long shot, but she had to try. She would go to James Blackwood's office building and request a meeting. She would explain that her late husband had worked on one of his projects and that she had important information about construction safety issues. It wasn't entirely untrue. David had often mentioned problems with corner cutting and safety violations on job sites. After dropping Emma at school, Sarah drove downtown to the Blackwood building. She had dressed in her best outfit, a navy blue dress that she had worn to job interviews before David's accident. It was simple but professional. The lobby was as impressive as she remembered from her previous visit. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and the walls were lined with photographs showcasing various Blackwood Industries projects. Sarah approached the reception desk, her heart pounding. "Good morning," she said to the well-dressed young man behind the desk. "I'd like to request a meeting with Mr. Blackwood regarding a safety issue on one of his construction projects." The receptionist looked her up and down with barely concealed skepticism. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but this is regarding a serious safety violation that could result in legal liability for the company," Sarah said, trying to sound confident and professional. "I see, and you are?" "Sarah Martinez. My husband David Martinez worked construction on several Blackwood projects before his death in an accident." The receptionist's expression softened slightly at the mention of her husband's death. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Martinez. However, Mr. Blackwood doesn't take unscheduled meetings. If you have safety concerns, you should contact our corporate compliance office." Sarah had expected this response, but she pressed on. "This is time-sensitive information that Mr. Blackwood needs to hear directly. I have documentation that could save the company from significant legal exposure." It was a bluff, but Sarah hoped it would be enough to get her upstairs. The receptionist hesitated, then picked up his phone. "Let me see if someone from legal can meet with you," he said. While she waited, Sarah noticed a familiar figure entering the building. Victoria Blackwood swept through the lobby wearing a designer coat and carrying shopping bags from expensive boutiques. She was accompanied by 2 women who appeared to be friends or assistants, all of them laughing about something. Sarah instinctively stepped behind a large marble pillar, not wanting another confrontation. She watched as Victoria and her companions headed toward the private elevator that led to the executive floors. "Mrs. Martinez," the receptionist was calling her back to the desk. "Mr. Harrison from our legal department can see you now. He's on the 15th floor." Sarah thanked him and took the elevator up, her palms sweating as she rehearsed what she would say. The legal department was a maze of glass offices and conference rooms. A secretary directed her to a corner office where a middle-aged man in an expensive suit was waiting. Mrs. Martinez, I'm Robert Harrison, Chief Legal Counsel for Blackwood Industries, he said, gesturing for her to sit. I understand you have some concerns about one of our construction sites. Sarah took a deep breath and launched into her prepared story about safety violations she claimed David had witnessed before his death. Mr. Harrison listened politely but skeptically, asking pointed questions that Sarah struggled to answer convincingly. Mrs. Martinez, he finally interrupted, I appreciate you bringing this to our attention, but these are very general allegations without specific details or documentation. If you have concrete evidence of safety violations, I'd be happy to investigate, but— Please, Sarah said, abandoning her pretense. I need to speak with Mr. Blackwood personally. It's about my family's situation, and I believe he's the only person who can help us. Mr. Harrison's expression grew cold. Mrs. Martinez, if this is about financial assistance, you're in the wrong place. Blackwood Industries is not a charity. If you're experiencing hardship, I suggest you contact social services. I tried that, Sarah said desperately. I've tried everything. My daughter and I are about to be homeless, and your wife. She stopped herself before she could mention Victoria's rejection at the bookstore. My wife, Mr. Harrison looked confused. I think you have me confused with someone else. I'm not married to anyone in the Blackwood family. Sarah realized her mistake. In her desperation, she had assumed that anyone in a position of authority at the company must be connected to the family. I'm sorry, she said, standing to leave. I've made an error, thank you for your time. As she rode the elevator down, Sarah felt defeated once again. Her plan had been foolish from the start. People like James Blackwood didn't meet with desperate strangers, no matter what story they told. But as the elevator stopped at the lobby floor, Sarah heard a commotion near the reception desk. Victoria Blackwood was there, arguing loudly with someone on her phone. I don't care what the contractor says, Victoria was saying. The charity luncheon is tomorrow, and that ballroom better be perfect or heads will roll. Sarah was about to hurry past when she heard Victoria mention something that stopped her cold. The Children's Safety Charity is my biggest event of the year, Victoria continued. We're raising money for playground equipment and safety programs, if anything goes wrong. Children's safety. Sarah's mind raced. Victoria Blackwood was organizing a charity event focused on keeping children safe, while Sarah's own child was about to become homeless and possibly separated from her only parent. Before she could talk herself out of it, Sarah approached Victoria. Mrs. Blackwood, excuse me, she said quietly. Victoria looked up, irritated at being interrupted, and her face immediately hardened when she recognized Sarah from the bookstore incident. You, Victoria said coldly. How did you get in here? Security. Wait, please, Sarah said quickly. This is about children's safety, your charity. Victoria paused, her hand still raised to summon security. What about it? I heard you talking about your event tomorrow, Sarah continued rapidly. You're raising money to keep children safe, but there's a child who needs safety right now. Today, my daughter. I already told you. She's 8 years old, Sarah interrupted. Her father is dead and we're about to be evicted. Do you know what happens to children who end up in the shelter system? Do you know the statistics on kids who get separated from their parents? Victoria's expression remained cold, but she hadn't called security yet. My daughter's name is Emma, Sarah pressed on. She's brilliant and kind and brave. She draws pictures of her dead father and talks to him at night. She thinks I'm the strongest person in the world, but I'm failing her. I'm about to lose her to a system that won't protect her the way I can. Other people in the lobby had started to notice the conversation. Victoria glanced around nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the public attention. In 2 days, we'll be homeless, Sarah said, her voice breaking. Not because I don't work hard, not because I don't love her enough, but because sometimes loving someone isn't enough to protect them from circumstances beyond your control. Victoria's phone was still pressed to her ear, but the person on the other end had apparently hung up. She stared at Sarah with an unreadable expression. You're raising money tomorrow night for children's safety, Sarah continued. But what about the children who need safety tonight? What about Emma? For a moment, neither woman spoke. The lobby around them buzzed with quiet conversation and the sound of clicking heels on marble floors. Finally, Victoria spoke. How much do you need? Sarah's heart leaped. 3 months' rent, $4,000. It would give us time to get back on our feet. That's not how this works, Victoria cut her off. I don't just hand out cash to people who approach me on the street. Sarah's hope began to crumble again, but Victoria wasn't finished. However, Victoria continued, I do know someone who might be able to help. My husband's company occasionally provides emergency assistance to families of construction workers who were injured or killed on our job sites. David didn't die on a Blackwood project, Sarah said honestly. No, but he worked on several of our buildings, Victoria replied. That might be enough. Victoria pulled out her phone and made a call. Sarah could only hear one side of the conversation, but it sounded promising. James, it's me. I'm here in the lobby with a woman whose husband used to work for us. Yes, I know you're in a meeting, but this is important. Her name is Sarah Martinez. Her husband was David Martinez. Can you see us now? Victoria hung up and turned to Sarah. My husband will see you, but I want to be clear about something first. Sarah nodded, hardly daring to breathe. When I dismissed you at the bookstore, it wasn't personal, Victoria said. I get dozens of requests for money every week. If I helped everyone who asked, I'd be broke within a month. But after you left, I couldn't stop thinking about what you said about your daughter. The elevator arrived, and Victoria gestured for Sarah to join her. I have a daughter too, Victoria continued as they rode up to the executive floor. She's grown now, but I remember when she was 8. I remember how fiercely I wanted to protect her from everything that could hurt her. The executive floor was even more luxurious than the lobby. Victoria led Sarah down a hallway lined with original artwork to a set of double doors marked with James Blackwood's name. Inside, the office was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. James Blackwood sat behind a massive desk, a distinguished man in his 50s with graying hair and kind eyes. Mr. Blackwood, this is Sarah Martinez, Victoria said. Her husband David worked on the Riverside Complex and the Downtown Tower project. James Blackwood stood and shook Sarah's hand. Mrs. Martinez, I'm sorry for your loss. David was a good worker, I remember him well. Please sit down and tell me how we can help. For the next 20 minutes, Sarah told her story once more. But this time, both James and Victoria listened without interruption. When she finished, James was quiet for a moment, then picked up his phone. I need you to set up the emergency assistance fund payment for Mrs. Martinez. Yes, the full amount. And I want you to contact HR about job opportunities that might be suitable for her background. No, today. He hung up and turned back to Sarah. We're going to cover your rent for 6 months, not 3. That should give you enough time to find stable employment. We also have an opening in our property management division. It's entry-level, but it comes with health benefits and opportunities for advancement. Sarah couldn't speak. Tears streamed down her face as the weight of months of fear and desperation finally lifted from her shoulders. There is one condition, James continued. I want you to speak at my wife's charity event tomorrow night. Tell your story to our guests. Help them understand that sometimes charity isn't about writing a check. It's about recognizing the humanity in someone standing right in front of you. Sarah wiped her eyes and nodded. Yes, of course, anything you need. Victoria, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during the conversation with her husband, finally spoke up. Mrs. Martinez, I owe you an apology. When you approached me at the bookstore, I saw you as just another person trying to take advantage of my wealth. I didn't see you as a mother trying to protect her child. You don't need to apologize, Sarah said. You're helping us now, that's what matters. No, I do need to apologize, Victoria insisted. Because the truth is, I was once in a situation not unlike yours. Before I married James, I was a single mother working 3 jobs to support my daughter. I know what it feels like to be desperate and afraid. Sarah looked at Victoria with new understanding. Beneath the designer clothes and expensive jewelry was a woman who had once struggled just as Sarah was struggling now. The difference, Victoria continued, is that I was lucky enough to meet James, who saw my worth beyond my circumstances. Today, you helped me remember what it feels like to need help and what it means to receive it. That evening, Sarah picked up Emma from school with a smile on her face for the first time in months. As they drove home, she told Emma about the job offer and the fact that they wouldn't have to move after all. Really, Mama? Emma asked, her eyes wide with excitement. We get to stay in our home. "We get to stay," Sarah confirmed. "And Mama has a new job that will help us take better care of everything." Emma threw her arms around Sarah's neck when they stopped at a red light. "I knew Daddy would find a way to help us," she said, "just like in my dream." That night after Emma was asleep, Sarah sat in their small living room and looked around at the home she had almost lost. Tomorrow, she would start a new job with opportunities for growth and advancement. Emma could stay in her school with her friends. They would be okay. But more than that, Sarah had learned something important about the nature of help and hope. Sometimes it came from unexpected places. Sometimes it required swallowing your pride and taking risks. And sometimes it meant believing in the goodness of people even after they had disappointed you. The next evening, Sarah stood on the stage at Victoria Blackwood's charity gala wearing a simple black dress that Victoria had bought for her. The ballroom was filled with wealthy donors who had paid thousands of dollars per plate to attend the event. "When I approached Mrs. Blackwood for help," Sarah told the audience, "I wasn't asking for charity. I was asking for a chance to keep my family together. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give a child isn't money or toys or opportunities. Sometimes it's simply the security of knowing that the people who love them will never give up fighting for them." The audience was silent, hanging on every word. "Mrs. Blackwood had every right to dismiss me when I first approached her," Sarah continued. "I was a stranger asking for money, but she chose to look beyond that and see a mother trying to protect her child. That choice changed everything for my daughter and me." As Sarah spoke, she could see Victoria in the audience, tears streaming down her face. James sat beside his wife, pride evident in his expression. "Tonight, you have the opportunity to make that same choice," Sarah concluded. "To look beyond the statistics and see the real children whose lives you can change. Every dollar you donate tonight is a vote for the safety and security of a child somewhere in our community." The response was overwhelming. The charity raised more money that night than it had in any previous year. But for Sarah, the real victory was simpler and more personal. As she left the stage, Victoria was waiting for her with a warm embrace. "Thank you," Victoria whispered, "for reminding me why this work matters, for showing me the difference between writing a check and actually helping someone." 6 months later, Sarah had been promoted twice at Blackwood Industries. Emma was thriving in school, her confidence restored by the stability they had regained. They had moved to a better apartment in a safer neighborhood, and Sarah was even able to start saving money for Emma's college fund. But the most important change was in Sarah herself. She had learned that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness, but of strength. She had discovered that sometimes the people who seem the most privileged are also the ones who understand struggle in ways that aren't immediately apparent. And she had proven to herself that love really was enough, not to prevent every hardship, but to give you the courage to keep fighting when everything seems hopeless. On the anniversary of David's death, Sarah and Emma visited his grave together. Emma placed fresh flowers on his headstone while Sarah told him about their new life, their new home, and the new opportunities that had opened up for them. "I think Daddy's proud of us," Emma said as they walked back to their car. "I know he is," Sarah replied, taking her daughter's hand. "And I think he's proud that we never gave up on each other." As they drove home through the city, past the buildings that David had helped construct, and the Blackwood Tower where Sarah now worked, she reflected on the long journey that had brought them to this moment. It hadn't been easy, and there had been times when she had almost lost hope entirely. But sometimes, when you fight hard enough for long enough, the universe surprises you with exactly the help you need, delivered by exactly the right person at exactly the right moment. And sometimes, the people who seem least likely to understand your struggles are the ones who understand them best of all. Because mothers didn't give up. They fought until the very end, and sometimes, if they were very lucky, the universe rewarded that kind of determination with a miracle. Tomorrow, she would start over. Tomorrow, she would find another way to save their home and keep her daughter safe. Because that was what mothers did, especially when they were all their children had left in the world.